Hi, I'm Carrie Smith.
And I'm Emma Skip, and welcome to It's a Death Sentence.
This is a podcast that takes a lighter look at the heavier things.
So, if you want some of this... So somebody could have been dead for a week and end up with you.
Or maybe longer, and somebody might say, oh, there's a really bad smell. Or...
A little bit of this.
I haven't got a tissue. I'll get one. You got one. And plenty of this.
So original. Fucking hell. Then this is the show for you. Because
life,
it's a death sentence.
So welcome back everybody to It's a Death Sentence. And today's episode is all about suicide.
Yeah.
So it's a heavy subject. Suicide remains a huge national issue in the UK, and despite the emphasis there is on mental health issues these days, it still is a massive issue.
Yeah, it is a crisis, isn't it?
Massively. And it's the biggest killer of people under 35 years old.
It's absolutely frightening when you think of it like that. I think let's just get straight into it. I mean, we discussed this earlier in the kitchen. I've lost 4 friends to suicide. All of whom I knew reasonably well. 3 men, one woman.
It's prevalent in men, they say.
Yeah, and it's men under 40 as well, isn't it?
Men under 50.
Men under
the biggest
50,
killer of men under 50.
I'm going to jump in and I'm going to just say, so the first time I lost a friend or an acquaintance, if you like, somebody who was in our group of friends, and I was in my very early 20s. And it was a time in my life where we lost a couple of other people in the same group of friends to accidental death and an illness. And I remember in my early 20s, my views on suicide were radically different to how they are now.
Yeah, I think it's
life experience.
Yeah, life experience and maturity.
Yeah. So if I reflect back at that time, sorry, I've just been rubbing my leg, which the microphone's probably picked up. Yeah, can you hear that? So it's like
the bristles.
Sandpaper. When this happened, and we were in our early 20s in our friendship group, I remember absolutely having this thought: how could he?
I think a lot of people go through that.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. My views now are radically different. Radically. So, as a young person, which I was then, how could he? How graphic it was, and how it was explained, how he left people behind. And again, I am going to choose how I phrase this because I don't want anybody being upset by it. So it's fairly generic how I'm talking about it, but. And a kind of anger because at the time we'd lost another friend and it was accidental, and thinking, that person didn't get to choose, and why, real kind of anger and a real lack of understanding, real lack of compassion towards it. And then again, it happened in our 30s. We both lost somebody, and by then it had changed. I think we're, like you said in the last podcast, we are transient people. We change our opinion all the time on loads of things, and that's okay. It's all right to do that. But particularly between the ages of your early 20s and your early 40s, 20 years have passed. I've got 20 years of life experience. I've got 20 years of having lost different people in my life, and particularly understanding what you've just said, which is mental health issues. I don't think in my early 20s I had any concept of that. Did you?
No, definitely not. And I think what it takes to actually end your own life, you've got to be in an amazingly bad place to go through with something like that that's so final.
From a clinical point of view, Carrie, like I once read, and it did make a lot of sense to me that like all humans have moments in their life of psychosis, right, which is where we don't think rationally. So could you argue that when somebody actually decides to end their own life, are they in a moment of psychosis?
I wouldn't say psychosis, but I think, like I've said before, emotions change, and I think what I find particularly sad is if younger people take their own lives, and often sometimes the reasoning for doing so is emotional. It's emotionally driven, and I always think to myself, I would love if only they had somebody to say, this feeling will change.
It will pass.
This too will pass.
Yes.
Whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
You're not going to feel like this forever.
Yeah. But trying to explain that to a young person.
Yeah.
You know, you think of yourself then, and, you know, let's use a relationship as the kind of the standard. A relationship ends when you're in your 20s and you think you'll never get over it. A relationship ends when you're in your 40s, you think you'll never get over it. But, you know, once you've had 10, 20 years beyond that, you know that you do, because you've had the life experience. Now, if you end your own life in the first hurdle, let's say, you've not given yourself chance, I suppose. You could argue that, couldn't you? But then,
that's us talking from people who have been through our own difficulties in life and have not resorted to that.
Yeah.
But there are people who obviously that have resorted to it. So I think it's very difficult to understand.
Really difficult to understand
what somebody must be thinking to go through with
what
that.
The percentage is. I mean, there must be statistics reported. I don't know how accurate they could be, but what is the percentage of somebody who plans it to the nth degree, or to somebody who has a fleeting thought about it and in that moment just is whimsical and does it?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the percentages are. I know that in 2003 there was 7,050 deaths roughly in the UK from suicide, and that's something like 19 a day.
Wow.
And that's an awful lot of people.
And was that majority male?
I don't know what the majority is or was of it, but I do know that at certain times of the year you tend to get more suicides. We tend to get more suicides in the mortuary at certain times of the year.
Well, is it true that it's spring?
Yeah, so April, May, June.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast about this the other day.
Yeah,
trying to swat up for this episode, and it was saying actually there was this kind of emphasis. People said, "Oh, it tends to be in January. You know, Christmas is over. People are in debt, and there's all these factors."
Winter,
but there was
a time where people they're emotionally. Although any big event is difficult, and sometimes big celebrations does encourage someone to go through with what they want to do, but often we're not out. We're protected. We're in our homes. Everybody's in early, locked in.
Yeah.
When things start to open up, the world opens up a little bit because there's more time to do things and it's brighter. I think that's often the time when people do decide to finish things.
I think that is in keeping with what I'd listened to the other day when people were saying, you know, we all look to the spring as this new start. Things will get better. Things will get better. Things will get better. And inevitably, for a lot of people, it doesn't.
It doesn't, yeah.
And that is that's the point in which they decide they're going to do that. And I think, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and be really controversial here. You know, when you think about how somebody does kill themselves, there are many ways in which to do it. I can't fathom doing something to myself that is so painful, physically painful. So, you know, people who hang themselves, people who shoot themselves, people who, you know...
Imagine the despair, though, you must be feeling to do that.
This is where I go back to that psychosis thing. You must be in a place in your mental health that is beyond redemption.
In that moment.
Mm. And that's what I mean, like... Is it partly whimsical? Because a lot of people plan. They plan it. They've got an idea. And there's also a thing around it. I mean, you will know more about this than perhaps I will, but I remember reading... we'd lost a friend again, and reading about how, especially when it's a shock, like you're like, I can't believe that has happened. I just can't... But reading about how they almost have a day beforehand.
Where they pick up and they're great.
Exactly that.
Yeah. They do say that when someone's made that decision, even if they've got a history of sort of, you know, depression or whatever, if they've made the decision that they're going to do it and they've made active plans and they're going to carry it out, they tend to be the day before or a couple of days before, everyone thinks, oh, they were fantastic. They were fine yesterday.
Because they found a peace. And they
must have found peace.
In that way, the people who are like that and have planned in that way going back to my suggestion of are we in some kind of psychosis in that moment, then they're not, are they? Because they've planned it for a day, 2 days before, even if they've planned it a year before, or they've got their thought of how they would do it, they have gone ahead and decided to do it and have that peaceful time beforehand, or that day that is better beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the people that are left behind that is sometimes the most damaging for people who take their own lives.
Yeah.
You know, the questions that are there, the what could I have done, the guilt.
Yeah.
There's so many questions that it leaves behind. And for me, it's a real personal loss, because I lost my uncle to suicide.
Right.
And I see the devastation that was left behind when he took his own life. And
was he a young man when you did that?
he was over 60, so he had his 60th birthday. I can't remember how old he was now. The devastation that it left my aunt in, you know, when she's looking at the time of her life where they're finishing work, the children are grown up, that it's going to be their time, and now she's left with, you know, nobody. No, I mean, she's got her kids, but she's, you know, the plans she had to spend with him, they're now no longer there. And
was that a shock to the family, or was it something? Did he have a history of depression?
He had a history of mental health issues leading up to it, and he'd been depressed before, and I think he'd had a previous attempt that was unsuccessful, and then obviously this successful attempt was the last one. And it's terrible to see the people like my cousins and my auntie and just like the sheer devastation that was left.
I don't think people ever.
You can't understand. You can't understand the motivation.
No.
You can't understand why somebody would do that to you. If you're
and that's how it would feel.
It feels personal. Why would you do that to me?
And that's it, where you have to then put yourself in the shoes of the person that's done it, and
he was failed epically by the mental health team. Yeah. And the support wasn't there, and sadly, you know, had the support been there, potentially, there could have been something that was done. But I don't know, is the honest answer.
I think, without being, you know, very derogatory towards mental health support, let's just call it what it is.
Because some of it is fantastic, but
there isn't a lot.
There's not enough of it.
I know that we spoke to a police officer recently who said, we just get called out for every mental health problem there is, because there isn't a kind of rescue team in that situation. Yes, you could call the Samaritans, and good on them for all the brilliant work they do.
But what can you do at the end of a phone?
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do?
I mean, obviously there is some good you can do, but they need that intervention,
and
it's
especially,
not always there.
Especially if it's called early. You know, I've heard from a few friends, you know, how they could tell that their loved one they've now lost needed intervention, needed help, and they went and asked for it and they didn't get it. And the same in the last podcast we just recorded when I talked about the lady I supported.
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, I did everything I could with the local... So her local GP, their mental health team, and they just sent her home to an environment that she had threatened.
Where she was at risk.
She threatened to kill herself that morning through taking an overdose, and the drugs were still there. And that was it. That was her assessment done, and that was her going back into the community.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
So, I think where I'm going with this is there's a lot of signposting, loads of signposting available. But what about actual physical, real help? When it's needed.
Boots on the ground, where are they?
Where is that? What's happening there?
So this month we're in May, and I'm doing 5k a day in May for
champion.
Yeah, I'm knackered.
How you feeling?
Knackered. For a charity called Calm, and it is a campaign against living miserably, and it's to raise funds for suicide awareness. And my motivation was my uncle to do it for him. So.
And how's it going?
And it's going well. It's hard work, but. You know, it's going well. We've raised a target.
Can you tell me what the campaign title was? That was an interesting title.
It's called Calm.
But the
campaign against living miserably.
Against living miserably.
Yeah.
What brilliant marketing.
Yeah. They do a lot apparently for suicide awareness.
Okay.
So so that's what I'm doing in May. So thank you for anyone who's donated, because it is on our socials, and very much appreciate that. And I'm halfway there.
Well
pretty
done.
Much.
Well done.
So we're getting there.
May I ask how long ago it was that you lost your uncle?
Oh, it's got to be God, it's got to be 3-4 years now.
Is this mum or dad's brother then?
It's my auntie's husband, so my mum's sister.
Okay, right. Wow. So, yeah, and he left behind children?
Yeah, adult children.
Still.
Grandchildren, and obviously...
Yeah. And I think, let's go back to that, because what you've said is the reaction that everybody has. Everybody who's a compassionate human being goes, how could you do that to someone else? And that is the...
But you're not doing it to someone else, you're doing it to you.
Yeah. And also, in the moment that somebody decides to end their own life, they are not thinking about anybody else. They are thinking that misery is so profound and so real that is the only solution.
The only way out,
And that's where, when I said earlier, my viewpoint in my 20s to the one in my 40s is enormously different. That's where I sit with it now, which is, I understand it a lot more, because if you've had any trauma or sadness in your life and you've felt really, really low, it's probably a thought you might have entertained.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I actually talked to my sister about this, she is a grief counsellor and a regular counsellor, and she said there's a really big difference between thinking you'd be better off dead and thinking about ending your own life.
Yeah.
And that, for me, was really poignant, because she said to me it's actually quite a normal feeling if somebody's very poorly, or if they've had a huge loss, or if they're in grief, or if they've, something catastrophic and significant has happened to them, to think, I'll just be better off dead. She said that's actually quite normal human rational thinking, but planning your own death through suicide is
making active plans.
These are two separate things.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I always think I should be really authentic and really honest while we do these podcasts. You've just shared your story about your uncle, but I have been quite unwell, and I'm now much, much better, hugely thankful and very grateful about it. But there was a time I thought, I can't live like this. I categorically cannot live. And it's the first time actually doing these podcasts I feel sad, because I never thought that would be in my life.
Yeah.
Ever. But I remember thinking, and that must be what it's like when people just are so... Because I was just so poorly, I thought, I can't be expected to live like this forever. This is awful. But that was the difference, because I talked to my sister about it and she said, Emma, you're not thinking of, doing that. You're thinking, at the moment, in the transient state you're in, I would be better off dead, because that's how you feel.
Yeah. Don't cry.
Why?
Oh, you can cry, you're allowed. I mean, as if suicide, people who die by suicide or taking their own lives is not stressful enough. Most deaths that are caused by suicide get referred to the coroner. So then they have to come in for post-mortem, which,
that must be enormously...
regardless of it being stressful enough, knowing that your loved one has taken their own life and they felt there was no way out, they're then referred to the coroner, which is then confusing and comes with its own set of issues.
Because it can be a massive weight, can't they, depending on how busy you are, presumably.
Yeah, depending on how busy you are. I mean, most people who take their own lives, luckily, they don't have to have an invasive post-mortem, so it is just CT scan.
And is that because
confirmed cause of death?
It's an obvious...
Yeah, most
so
of the time. So
when you're doing your
obvious.
walk around, you're like, this is death by...
Yeah, by X, Y or Z.
What about, can I ask you some questions around that? I know you have to be very careful in your job and would always be very cautious around that, but of the suicides that you see, are most of them what I would call physical? So something that, death by hanging, or I know that sadly shooting is becoming more, popular is the wrong word, isn't it? But more regular, because there's more firearms in the country than there was. But what about things like people taking overdoses?
I think a lot of the time, if people are going to take their own life, you'd want to be medicated, wouldn't you? So I think that is a go-to for some people. I don't want to advertise ways to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
we do get all sorts of
and so
ways that people take their own lives, and each one is extremely sad.
So if somebody ends up with you, who, I know we're deviating a little bit here, but this really satisfies my own interest, Carrie. is a post-mortem would have to be carried out, presumably, if the cause of death is unknown. So if they've ingested lots of tablets or poison, I don't know, but I mean, there must be lots of different ways in which people do it. Is there a full investigation then needed to determine that, or is
so
that
normally if they've come to us and there's normally a background, so you'd know if it was a suicide or taking their own life, and you'd take like toxicology and things like that. So to
which
confirm,
would show high levels of
would confirm cause of death. But yeah, like, you know, it's sad anyway, but having to be referred to the coroner then is just equally more confusing for everybody. But, you know, there's some very obvious ways people do it, and, you know, they're not pretty.
No.
And I understand that the trauma people must feel if they find their loved one in that position as well, because that in itself is very traumatic.
I think, this is where we go back to that whole, like, how selfish is that person, which I now don't believe is the case, but we do need to look at what, you know, the backlash, that devastation that you've just described, you know, that it has on everybody, young, old, middle-aged, whatever. But I think if you're leaving children behind, that's quite poignant, because that child has to grow up with quite a stigma or a taboo around it, because
I mean, there used to be a massive stigma.
Huge. And there's less of that
suicide.
now.
Terrible.
Less of it now, but also suicide rates are higher. So, you know, I don't know what that really tells us. Are people on the whole more miserable? Are they more stressed? Is there more pressure? I think yes to all of those things.
Yeah.
I wonder whether we'll see a big movement in mental health facility and, you know, safeguarding around these things. Will we see a change in our lifetime because these rates are so high?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for signposting people to, you know, websites and stuff, but I think if you're in absolute despair, even if you're not suicidal, you're just in despair and you call in to get help from somebody and you're signposted to a website, it's not particularly helpful.
No, it's not.
It's almost like, you know, off you go. You're a pest.
I hope things are going to change. I hope things will change for younger people. I think for me the saddest part is the help for the younger generation.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's devastating when someone... I mean, we do see older people as well.
Do you?
Yeah, which is sad.
That must be really sad.
Who don't want to be a burden. Again, back to this whole burden. Right. And that's why, you know...
That's interesting.
It's sort of loosely linked with the assisted dying, you know, in that respect. I think people feel like... Sometimes older people, if they get in the position where they've got not enough money, or they're struggling with money, and people are on a pension and they feel, oh, what's the point in living? Or if they've lost a partner.
My next question to you was we know about relationships. These cause lots of trauma in so many different ways. Heartbreak it does lead to it. It happens a lot. But I think financial worry is also a massive factor, isn't it?
And I think that is a motivator for a lot of men.
Yeah, I have read that before.
Yeah, that financial stress can be a big factor that would influence someone deciding to take their own life. There is lots of help out there for people who, like you say, the signposting, whatever, Samaritans, all your local stuff. But I mean, like you say, really, it's trying to get that intervention in early is the key. Really
early. And like you said, boots on the ground. All I'd say is, if you're listening to this podcast because you are fearful of somebody you love having these type of thoughts, or maybe they've suggested something to you,
or maybe you've lost someone to suicide.
But if you're at that early stage and you are a tenacious person, I would absolutely recommend going and making yourself a bloody nuisance to the GP until you get a fucking decent referral.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry to say it like that, but, you know, I think we all know that's the state of affairs at the moment. You have to be really like a dog with bone and make yourself a pest until you get what you want and what that person needs. And actually, if you're around a friend or family member that you think is having a suicidal thoughts, or, you know, and you can be that person, you might just save their life, actually.
You could be their advocate.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who's vulnerable, you know.
Yeah.
We did touch on this previously, suicide in Dead Funny. We talked about Ricky Gervais when he thought about suicide when he was in grief. He was grieving so badly that he thought about taking his own life, and we talked about a film called Otto where he was attempting to take his own life, and
Brilliant
because
film.
he was grieving the loss of his partner. You know, there's lots of dark humour out there around suicide, and it used to be, back in the day, it used to be something that was laughed at.
Well, it also brought shame on people and their families. I mean, that's not that long ago, is it?
No, there's massive taboos over it. Obviously, it's nothing to laugh at, suicide. You know, there's nothing funny about it.
No, but I think...
It's nice to approach it in that way, that it makes it more...
palatable,
like, for people to talk about it. Takes the taboo away slightly.
And I think, actually, Ricky Gervais has done so many favours.
We need to stop talking about Ricky Gervais.
We just love him.
We just love him,
But The Afterlife, I think, what that programme did was highlight why should somebody want to stay alive.
Yeah.
You know, that man is the main character is in huge amounts of torment and grief after losing his wife, and he doesn't see a point in living in the world without her. And why should it not be his choice? It's a very controversial question. How do you feel about it? Should you be able to end your own life if you feel that way inclined?
I just feel like I couldn't answer that question because it's so personal.
It's a tough one, I know. I thought you might go for it.
Well, I'm all pro-choice, you know, for everything you do, but I just think...
Well, it's hugely circumstantial, isn't it?
Yeah, I would never like knock anybody's choice. If that was their choice they made, I would never. You know, it's hard, isn't it? It's difficult.
Really tough.
I'm on the fence again.
Yeah, just sat right on
I just
that fence.
always sit on that fence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I know it's a heavy subject, and you know, as always, we try and approach these things with a bit of tact, and also, you know, we are very sensitive, and like we've both had experiences of this. But if there's anybody out there who'd love to share their story with us, we would love to talk to you.
Yeah. And if you just want to get in touch with us about anything that we've mentioned, please always do drop us a line.
And that's it from us.
We're always dying to talk to you,
and we'll see you soon.
So thank you, dear listeners. If you've enjoyed our show, then please do all the stuff that will help promote us.
Like and share our podcast, and follow us on socials, and please subscribe too. If you've got any feedback, it's most welcome, so please contact us.
Likewise, if there's a subject you'd like us to cover, please do get in touch, and thank you for your support.
We are dying to talk to you.